Alright, so this last video is going to have 3 slides. We're going to do about 5 examples using the secant and the tangent to find angle measures. Alright, so our first example, there's that center of the circle that I don't like, so I'm going to fill that in. Okay, so this one we have, let's make sure we can identify what we're looking at before we solve for x. This is a secant and that's a secant. So this is a secant example. Alright, so we are trying to find, I'm just going to zoom in on this one, we'll ignore the other one for a minute. We're trying to find the measure of angle x. So the vertex is on the outside of the circle. So remember, when the vertex is on the outside, we can find the measure of angle x by finding the difference. So remember, our angle is equal to half of the difference of the arcs. So they gave us some information in here. We have to make sure that we have exactly what we need. So which arcs do we need to find the measure of angle x? So you want to use the arcs that are formed by, or the secant intercepts the circle. So here's one arc and then this other arc right here. If you notice, this arc on the right is formed by just one of the secants, and this arc on the left is formed by just one of the secants. So you have to use the two arcs formed by both secants like that. So we know that this one is 130. That's great. We don't know what this one is. So do we have any way of finding that out? Well, they told us all the other arcs in the circle. And if you remember, if you go all the way around a circle, all those arcs should add up to 360 degrees. So if we take that 160 plus the 130 plus the 40, that's going to give us 330, and then we'll just subtract that from the total circle. 360 minus 330 gives us a 30-degree arc. So this arc is 30 degrees right there. Now we have enough information to find the angle measure. So to find the angle, all we do is, so the measure of angle x equals 1/2. I don't know why I'm writing slanted. Now instead of adding, we're going to subtract, and always start with the bigger arc. So we're going to take 130, because we want a positive answer on this, minus the smaller arc of 30. So 1/2 times 130 minus 30 is 100. 1/2 times 100 is 50. So the measure of angle x is equal to 50 degrees. All right, let's move on to example 5. So in example 5, what kind of angles are we talking about? We can see this is a tangent and that's a tangent. So this is our tangent example. Now, I'm going to fill in the center of my circle right there. Okay. So here's our angle x out here. The vertex is on the outside. So remember, if the vertex is on the outside, we're going to subtract the arcs. Well, we know that one of the arcs is from here to here, 220. Now, what we need is this other arc on the inside here. So do we have any way of figuring out what this arc is? Well, again, those two arcs form a full circle, so if we just take 360 and subtract out the 220, that's going to give us our arc, which is 140 degrees. That's the one we need. All right, so the math that we're going to do, the measure of angle x is equal to, we're going to subtract, starting with the bigger arc. So we're going to take, 1/2 times, we're going to do 220 minus 140, and then we just do that math. 1/2, 220 minus 140 is 80, and then 1/2 times 80 is 40 degrees. So the measure of angle x is equal to 40 degrees. All right, example 6. we can see that we have a tangent because it's hitting the circle just in that one spot on the edge, and then the other line is going into the circle, hitting the circle in two spots, so this is a secant tangent. Alright, so because here's our angle x right there, and the vertex is on the outside of the circle, that means we're going to subtract the arcs. So let's make sure we know which arcs we're using. We want the arcs formed by the secant and the tangent, so here's one of them. We're going to use that 88 degrees, and then the other one is right here, which they did not tell us what that is. So again, do we have any way of figuring that out? Yeah, we know that all of your arcs are going to add up to 360 degrees, and we've got the 220 and the 88, and we just need that leftover amount. So if we take that 220 and add the 88 to it, that gives us 308, and then we just take that number and subtract it from 360. Alright, so our arc that we need is 52 degrees. Well, there's that circle I don't like, center. Okay, so now how do we find the measure of angle x? So the measure of angle x is equal to 1/2 times. Now we're going to subtract the arcs, the bigger minus the smaller, so 88 minus 52. And again, the reason why we're subtracting is because the vertex is on the outside of the circle. So 88 minus 52 is 36. And then half of 36 is 18 degrees. Alright, so hopefully we're getting the hang of these. Example 7. Well, alright, example 7 is a little bit different, but that's alright. This is a secant, so it's a secant example. The difference here is that they actually gave us the angle measure. We know the angle is 10 degrees. So if you remember, the angle is equal to half of the difference of the arcs. So we're just going to plug in the information that we have and solve for the thing we're missing. So we start with the angle measure. Well, the angle measure is 10. So we're going to say 10 equals 1/2 times, and then we're going to subtract the two arcs, always starting with the bigger arc. Well, this 80-degree arc is our biggest arc, so we're going to say 80 minus, and then the arc we're trying to find is x. So 80 minus x. And then that gives us just a nice little equation to solve. The easiest thing to solve this, do you guys see how we have this 1/2 right here? So you can multiply both sides by 2 or divide both sides by 1/2. Basically, you're going to get rid of this 1/2 the same way every time. So you can go ahead and multiply by 2 on both sides. That's going to cancel out that 1/2. So you're going to have 20 is equal to 80 minus x. So when you're solving for one of the arcs and your x is on the inside of your parentheses, just multiply both those by 2 right away. That will get rid of the 1/2, leaving you with just the parentheses. So to solve this, let's keep going. We're going to subtract 80 from both sides. Now the thing we need to be careful with here, we have negative 60 is equal to, so this x is negative. Do you see how it's minus x in the equation? So you want to bring down that negative x. We can't have a negative x, so mathematically we're going to divide both sides by a -1 to get rid of the negatives. So x is equal to a -60 divided by a -1 is a positive 60. And then this is an angle, or it's an arc measure, so degree label goes on that. Alright, last example. I know this is getting to be a long video, but that's okay. So we have to find x, which is our arc right here. We can see we have secant forming this arc right here and this inside arc right there. So if we know, you want three things in your picture and you're going to solve for one of them. So obviously we're going to solve for this x. We know our angle measure. We need to know this arc measure right there, and then we can do our little equation we did on the last example. We do not have this arc measure, but similar to one of the other examples, we know that this angle right here is 15 degrees. You see how the vertex is on the circle? That means that the arc across from it, or the arc that it forms, is twice as big. So that's a 30-degree arc. All right, so let's think back to our little equation. The angle is equal to half of the difference of the arcs. And again, we're finding the difference because our angle is on the outside of the circle. So if we plug in all of our information, we know that our angle is 20 degrees. So we're going to say 20 equals 1/2 times. Now we're going to subtract the arcs. You do have to start with the bigger arc. So the two arcs we're talking about, one is x and the other is 30. You can tell that x is the bigger arc. So we're going to say x minus the smaller arc of 30. All right, so do you remember how we got rid of that 1/2 right away? You can just multiply both sides by 2. It's going to get rid of that in your first step. So you have 40 equals x minus 30. And then just one more step. Add 30 to both sides. So we have 70 is equal to x, and you see how x is positive, and that's what we want. And because this is an arc measure, we're going to put a degree on that. So our arc is equal to 70 degrees.